I've been pondering over which ailment to bring you, if I'm only allowed to bring you one. If I'm only allowed to bring you one, then I bring unto you my heart, shrouded in the dark, fluttering wildly far from the mark.
Trust fund. I have Ellis Jones here with me today from Sheffield, right? You're in Sheffield, aren't you? Is that
That's where I
true,
live, yeah.
Ellis? Cool. And he is going to be our last pod of this season 4. So we're going to wish you all a nice holiday season. And Ellis, thanks so much. I'm really happy that we finally connected and we get to kind of share your musical history so far. So thanks for hopping on and spending some time with us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
I've been really enjoying I would say a little bit of a revamp, of your style. And before we get into the new stuff, where did it start for you, Ellis? Like, when did music start to click for you? And you got your first guitar and you wrote your first song. Can you kind of give us some of that back history of how you got into the music, as a passion and also as a career possibility?
Career possibility, yeah, it's still a possibility rather than an actuality.
Right.
I mean, I've played music for pretty much as long as I can remember. I think I got a guitar at 5 or so, and I think I got an electric guitar, which was a poor choice on my parents' part. I think, volume wise.
Yeah.
Played in bands kind of as young as sort of 9 or 10. We had a band that played, looking back, music that I still like, but nothing to do with me. But my friend was really into the Ramones, so we were doing kind of Ramones covers at that age. And then sort of writing things myself from about 15 or 16, and kind of got a little multi-track around that time. So I think that's when I started becoming interested in recording and the sort of iterative process of recording things, listening, realizing that the way that you think you sound in your head when you put it on tape or whatever, there's
Totally.
that disjunct there. So and then so Trust Fund, this musical project, I think began in about 2010. So I would have been 21-ish, something like that. And it was a kind of bedroom pop thing that then turned into a slightly more, maybe a kind of power poppy type thing, that brought other people on board. And then around sort of 2014, 15 was kind of where I guess we had some degree of success, very limited degree of success, but in terms of the music that people know of mine and of ours, it's often a couple of records from around then. And then kind of went on for a few years from there, and then for various reasons it felt like a good time to, well, at the time I guess I thought it was a kind of a full stop, but obviously here I am on a podcast trying to promote the new album. So
it's hard, it's something hard to get out of your blood once you've had that. And I mean, your catalog is really amazing. I've had a chance to kind of like dive back. I mean, listening to I've Been Ages from 2012. I mean, such a great record. And I love the progress that you made throughout the records, and they got a lot of attention. I just looking at the people on Bandcamp that actually, would purchase. I know that you weren't selling it for thousands of dollars, right? You wanted it to get out there, but I think you were really successful in getting your music into a lot of people's ears.
Yeah, and looking back, actually, that was a peak era for Bandcamp as well, right? It was a time when people were using that for music discovery, whereas now, I mean, I don't think it works in the same way as a tool for music discovery, but also in terms of if you're trying to gauge the popularity of something, Bandcamp is probably not where people would go to look at that. But I think it did find an audience, certainly a bigger audience than I'd ever expected it to. So I'm still very grateful that, it's that thing of you kind of always want a few more people to be listening, but equally, it's nice to feel like there are, even if it's like a couple of hundred, say, that there are people who are kind of would anticipate a new release and would listen to it and kind of be hopefully mildly excited at the prospect of new music from me, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Amazing. And like, if you rewind a little bit to those first albums that Trust Fund actually were putting out,
Yeah.
what was your mindset behind it? Like, what did you have an idea of the kind of style you wanted, or did it evolve over time? Because it did shift, right? Like, it wasn't a consistency, like you'd turn a Trust Fund album on, it would be like, okay, I know what to expect. Like, it was almost you were surprising people. How much was that planned versus how much did that just happen naturally over time?
Yeah, not planned at all, and probably just about changing tastes, or not tastes, because I do think lots of people are quite omnivorous in their tastes, right? But
Yeah.
changing passions, or changing kind of interests into terms of like different musical ideas that seem worth exploring at a certain time. So yeah, I've been ages that you mentioned that 2012-ish was, I mean, I was mostly, I guess I was listening to a lot of like Drake and Frank Ocean and things like that. And I don't know whether that's exactly what comes across, but it's quite loop based, it's quite
Right.
synthy. And then, you know, a few years after that, it's quite fuzzy guitar music. Yeah. And I've just, I mean, I don't know what the next thing is, but I did just buy a sampler on eBay this week. So,
Cool.
you know, just already like kind of think, oh, it'd be kind of nice to mess around with that again. And yeah, so
Right.
I don't think there's any deliberate intent to surprise, but equally, I'm quite glad that hopefully the idea of like listening to a trust fund release doesn't necessarily imply too much about what it's going to sound like.
Right. Right. Did you have different players that played on each of those records that you'd put out? I mean, I think it was, I read 5 or 6 or 8, or you can fill in that gap there. But
Yeah.
did you always have the same people coming in to accompany you, or did that crowd also shift, and did that influence what the sound eventually ended up on the records?
Yeah, there's been times when it has been a pretty consistent lineup, and other times when it's been a bit more ad hoc. You know, that I grew up in Bristol, and that's kind of where the band or the project started. And there was a time there where it felt like, oh, we'll just kind of see who's around that week and kind of play with those people. And in hindsight, that was just something that was very that I was quite fortunate to be able to do, in terms of, you know, that time in your life where people are just kind of setting aside time to mess around with music, and playing gigs where there's no pressure and no expectation and things like that. And I, you know, I'm in my mid-30s now, and I'm not that available, and other people aren't that available to mess around like that. So it's a bit more structured now. And the live, we're playing as a duo, so it's me and Celia, who's my girlfriend. And you know, we live together, so that makes it very easy to practice and things like that.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
And do you think that as you were your songwriting process over time, do you think that has evolved as well? I mean, does the process change as your style shifts? Like, or do you always tend to approach your songwriting in a very similar way?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I think it's always quite similar, which is, yeah, I think a question that I get a lot, but not that I get asked many questions too often, but you know, even chatting amongst friends, it's kind of, do you write the lyrics first or the music first?
Right.
And I think for me, it's usually kind of a lyrical idea that seems to me interesting enough to set to music, and often using some aspect of the lyric to kind of shape a melody, if that makes sense, or think about how it would sort of naturally fall as a melody.
Yeah.
And then from there, even if it's literally just one line, that's often enough to write a whole song. So you kind of have one line of lyrics, then all the music, and then you're kind of filling in the rest of the lyrics. So you can, from my perspective at least, if you listen to any Trust Fund song, you can probably tell what the line I thought was good enough, you know, to base a whole song around, and then the rest of it is kind of dross or filling in bits from, you know, notes I've taken and things like that. So yeah, it's been pretty similar, just with different textures, I suppose, and different instrumentation, and and different people.
Right. Do you know when you're penning a song and catches you? Like, do you get that feeling of, okay, this, I think I'm onto something here? Or is it put aside and then you pull it back out? And like, how do you know when something is worth continuing that process with, and that might eventually, be on tape?
I think having done that, that sort of period of being a teenager and sort of recording things, listening back, eventually you don't have to do that anymore. Eventually you realize when you're practicing something, oh, this will sound good, or this does sound good. So I think these days, I mean, it's kind of embarrassing, but I think when I write something that I think is good, I get an emotional response that I hope is similar to listening to it. And obviously over time, that kind of wears off in that, you forget, I guess, especially when you've finished an album and you listen back to it and you're kind of feeling nothing about it at that point, potentially. But you have to hope that that thing that you thought was interesting about it 6 months ago is still in there for people encountering it for the first time. Totally. So yeah, there is a feeling when you're writing, I think, that I am. It sounds sort of self-involved, but you are kind of emotionally responding to something that you're creating somehow.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, it's coming from your soul and from your mind, and like it's a personal thing, really. It's interesting too that you say that from. I'm thinking from a listener standpoint of when there's a song that I encounter that's just like, oh my God, I want to listen and listen. Like I almost have to stop myself because I don't want to over listen, and then it just loses that meaning that it has in the moment.
Right. Yeah.
So it's interesting to see it from the other side, the other perspective, which is pretty cool.
I suppose, thinking about it like that, it's not surprising that it loses meaning for songwriters, because you sort of inherently have to play it to yourself, even just to think, okay, where does it go now after the verse or whatever, or you've made a demo that you want to be able to listen back to. So yeah, I have heard these songs more than anyone else on the planet. It's probably not surprising that, well, me and Celia, but and Celia's really sick of them. So
well, it's that juggernaut of music where you just every detail you're hanging on, just because you want the overall thing to be something that you can put out into the world, and it's there. It doesn't go anywhere. It's going to be there. I mean, forget CDs or tapes or whatever. Once it's out there, it's in people's minds. So it's a different, you want it to be perfect. But that requires getting sick of it to no end, and the mixing and the, Ellis, I wanted to ask you too, like, because you've been playing music for so long, can you tell us a few of the moments where it shifted for you, where you felt like you went to that next level with your music? Like, were there moments in time where you're like, that was a changing point? That's when, we didn't have to invite people to the show anymore. They just started showing up. Like, do you remember those kinds of little moments that happened in your career?
I'm sure there are some. I mean, I don't think I'm very good at kind of what's the word, kind of being in the moment enough to recognize that kind of shift. I mean, recently, so we just had the album out and we played there's string quartet arrangements on the album, through most of the record, really, that I wrote, but I sent them basically to someone on the internet to play. So I'd heard them and I was really pleased with how they came out and everything, but we had the album release shows and we played with a string quartet based in Sheffield. So that concert where, it's the first time I've played alongside the strings players playing that record, and it's the first time I've handed the sheet music to someone, and I don't really read sheet music, so to give that to someone and say, okay, what do you make of this? Let's see if we can work this out. And it was something I was really, really worried about, because it's just a new thing. It's a new way of, and we only had one rehearsal, and just, and I was also co-promoting the concert. So there's all just these little things that were kind of stressing me out about it. And we played that Sheffield show, a few weeks ago. And from my perspective, it went really, really well. It was an audience of people who I didn't know absolutely everybody there, but it's where I live. So there was a lot of familiar faces there who kind of knew how much it meant to me as well. And I think that was the only moment, the only time ever, I think, where I've got to the end of a concert and I felt like emotionally kind of flooded, or I was going to say drained, which is the total opposite of flooded, but just emotionally like, wow, like I sort of couldn't, I didn't quite know how to respond. And I would kind of was just like, wow, I don't know what to do. And, everyone was, it was well received, I think, but it was more just that thing of, wow, we actually did that. And I'm not sure if that's precisely the kind of thing you were asking about, but that is one of the only moments in my whole time playing music, I think, where I got to the end and I thought, wow, I know that I achieved something. Do you know what I mean? Rather than just kind of getting to the end and be like, oftentimes you're playing a half-hour set and either there's a band on after you or they need to tidy up. So the first thing after you play is like, oh, let's put the cables away. Let's make sure, let's run off to the merch table, or, these things are just admin basically. So it was really nice to have a moment like that felt kind of musically special, I guess.
Is it possible that ended up on YouTube? Because I did watch a show recently. Well, I watched it yesterday of you, and you had 4 violinists, a cellist, and yourself. And then you had I'm not sure if it was your partner or not, but you had a female vocal as well that came up.
That's Celia. I'm pretty sure that would have been the same thing, that at least some of it was recorded.
I hear you when you say that emotional, because it felt that way too, watching it. That it felt like real and true and genuine, and like no filters, like just like, here I am, here are my songs. I thought it was really charming, and I can only imagine being there live how that must have felt for the listeners themselves. Very impressive.
I think it was quite a good. I think, and I hope it was a kind of shared experience there. In it, I think you can kind of tell to the extent to which the audience is kind of with you, and it felt really special.
I could tell through your expressions, because the camera was on you most of the time, and then it would pan now and then to the other players, but I could see that emotion in you, and like kind of timid, but at the same time just like glowing on the inside. And I thought your delivery was really amazing. Your guitar playing was just sensational. And it's really reflected in this latest record. I want to get the title right. Hasn't been a while. And it has been a while. So this was a 6-year period between the last trust fund to this one that you just put out. What did it come out? November 1st of this year. And it is quite a departure from your previous recordings. Could you expand on maybe how did your vision kind of change, or how did was this idea brewing for a while that you would strip it back, acoustic, classical instrumentation with a very kind of singer-songwriter aesthetic to it? Was this something that you had wanted to do like for a while, or was this something you discovered over that period of time that you were not writing or performing or releasing, I should say?
I think it's probably a kind of ultimately a kind of COVID lockdown thing. Or I suppose there's a few aspects to it. I mean, it stopped the band, and then so actually that really stopped in 2017. It just took us a while to get the record out. And then kind of, I guess, wasn't playing electric guitar, wasn't playing live music with anyone, but there was always the kind of the classical guitar to hand, so just sort of tended towards that. And I suppose it was sort of 2020, 2021 where I just had a bit more time to go a bit deeper into that and start thinking more about, always written on classical guitar, always, never written on electric, just kind of always found it easier. I think there's something about writing on electric guitar that feels like cheating almost. It always sounds kind of cool and good, but if you can write a song on sort of Spanish
couple
guitar,
of pedals in there, and
exactly, you've kind of given yourself too much already, I think. So always wrote that way, but then I think I don't know, just kind of naturally started focusing a bit more on technique and a bit more on different styles of playing and things like that. And I don't, it wasn't till quite late on that I thought, actually, there's so much of this stuff that it's essentially a record's worth of things that sound basically texturally the same. I hope there's variation within the songs, but in terms of the timbre or whatever, the kind of the way that the record's laid out, it's kind of the same all the way through. And that there's been quiet, like acoustic-y songs on earlier Trust Fund records, but they're always kind of within other styles of music going on. So the thing this time, I suppose, was to say that here's half an hour's worth of music that is basically trying to achieve more or less one thing, or more or less a consistent thing across that time.
Yeah. And did the themes change at all? Like, I don't know, like a fuzz indie rock song theme, does that translate to like more of an indie folky singer songwriting theme, or did the themes get deeper with this latest record?
I think the themes are kind of slightly less goofy, a tiny bit less sort of silly, which, not that the music was ever silly before really, but there's kind of a willingness to talk about very kind of specific real world, there's lots of mentions of like supermarkets or phones and sort of crisps, I don't know, just very like ephemeral stuff.
Maybe more playful a little bit,
I think, maybe that's the better word, more playful. Whereas I think, I hope that the lyrics aren't too sort of dour or anything, and I hope they're still kind of playful in a way, but definitely sort of steered away from sort of contemporary references a little bit, and away from probably away from as much direct experience, trying to be a little bit more observant rather than self-reflective, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I was gonna say that they feel much more reflective, still playful. I mean, as I listen to the record, I follow along the lyrics, and I mean, you're a very, very good songwriter. Your finger picking too is just like, I love it. It has such an ease it just seems to flow off your fingers, and then your accompanying lyrics really play well with. So I mean, sometimes it's hard, like a voice and a guitar, and you're like, okay, I mean, it's as raw as you can get, it's as basic as you can get, but I think that takes a lot of courage to do, and also a lot of thought and reflection, because there's nowhere to hide behind.
Yeah, that's the other difference in the lyrics as well, is that in a rock song you can get away with a few lines that are throwaway, or even there's lines that I literally just mumble because I didn't know what I was singing, so I'm just like, it'll be something like this,
just a little word salad.
And doing it this way made me realize how as I said, if you start with a really good lyric and then you're filling in the rest, at some point I would sort of stop bothering and say like, well, it doesn't really matter what I'm doing in that bit. And even so, I mean, some of the lyrics on this record were written kind of the day of recording, when I knew we were going into record, and I thought, we really, really have to finish this. But for the most part, things were a bit more thought through, and lyrically, just as you said, there's no hiding place. So you need to be at least not embarrassed by the worst of the lyrics,
Right. Yeah. So there's been a bit of time between the release, November 1st of. Has it been a while? What are your impressions now? I mean, I know you're saturated from listening to it. But like, what do you feel now, looking back on this, amazing accomplishment that you've done? I mean, being away for that long and coming back and changing your aesthetic of what your sound is. I mean, it's a lot of risks that you took. How are you feeling about it now? Like, with a little bit of distance and a little bit of retrospect, where are you at with it?
Quite pleased, I think. I haven't listened to the record in a few months, I guess. But I've been, we've just come off tour. We played 12 shows in the UK this month. And that's obviously a good kind of indication of how the music's being received. And that was as I said, I've never felt particularly concerned about changing the style in terms of the recordings, but it's when you play live that people arrive expecting a certain thing. And it's different if you like, you put it on Bandcamp, you don't actually have to see people's faces as you're playing those songs.
Right.
So
Right.
I think it did take, because so it was kind of, hadn't played live until maybe late 2022. I played an acoustic set, and I think it's probably taken about that time, so almost 2 years, to get to a point where people are arriving expecting more or less what we're going to do. Because it was, as I said, when the band was at its most popular, it was a kind of 4-piece electric guitar rock band, and that's fun, and like there are definitely I'm not saying that's not good,
Right.
but we're trying to do something different, so it's about trying to make sure that people are arriving, well, either that people know what to expect, or feeling that you're going to play something that is good enough or interesting enough that by the end of it people will say, well, it's not what I expected, but it was still good, and I think that's the point we're at now, where most people aren't coming expecting the hits from 2015, basically.
Right. Right. Well, that's cool. So just to kind of bring things to a close, Alice, again, thanks so much for sharing some of your stories and spending some time. It's been really fun listening. What's coming down the pipe here? So we're closing out 2024. Like, is the writing continuing? More tours? What can you share with us about the future of Trust Fund?
More touring, anywhere that will have us, basically. So the label that put this album out is based in Hamburg in Germany. So we're going to do some dates in Germany and I think Spain next year, and hopefully more of Europe. North America is just tricky for various reasons, so we'll see. And in terms of writing, this is also the only time where I've got to the end of a record and thought, actually, those were the songs that I had, and we recorded them all. Normally there's been a bit of an overlap, and you think, oh, this one doesn't quite fit on this record, but I can maybe just wait and see for the next one. Right. There were basically 12 songs, and they got recorded. So it is a kind of break, although I'm playing guitar a lot, obviously. Right. But I'm trying to be a bit more involved with other people's music, partly because it's fun, but also to sort of tame my ego a little bit. And so Celia plays in a kind of indie folk band called Radiant Heart, and they've finished a record that I am kind of mixing and sort of co-producing. So that's all of the Trust Fund stuff has kind of been has taken a lot of both of our time, and so I have promised that getting this record finished for Celia's band is, before I start thinking about any other Trust Fund songs, that has to get done, which is I'm looking forward to, I should say. Yeah.
Well, good on you. I mean, it's amazing when a partnership also blossoms into the creative, realm of things as well. I mean, it's always tricky when you're, kind of working and having a relationship. It takes some talking and navigating at times, but that's really sweet of you to kind of like put your project on hold and focusing on your partners. So good on you for that.
Well, it's definitely overdue. So and it's going to be a really good record.
Awesome. Well, I'll mention it and I'll put a link to it in on my blog with this episode so that people can check it out as well.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much, and I wish you all the best. I hope you have a nice holiday season. Get a little bit of rest, maybe some fun, maybe jam out, pull the distortion pedal out of it for some fun. But it's been really great, and I appreciate you spending some time with us.
Thanks, Chris. It's been fun.
Thank you. Cool.
Has it been a while? I hadn't even noticed. I hadn't even noticed. I have been very focused. Has it been a while? I wouldn't know about it, and I have not been counting the weeks, the days, the hours. I never even thought once of our boundless endless months of love. If you've been watching, you'll have only seen me smile. Has it been a while? I have been concentrating on work that's all embracing. I am immediately facing. I am needed many places on a more than daily basis. Don't know why I have to say this. Don't know why I have to say it. My thoughts never drift to you late at night or early morning, and I never hear you calling me from halfway down the aisle. Has it been